I can actually prove that I wrote about the geo organ and the removable eye lenses that Colonel Corso talked about, and even the, whether you call it a remake or a fake alien autopsy film by Santilli, I was the first one to actually have proof that I talked about that before anybody else.
Anybody else? Yeah, that was because that was around about 1994, wasn't it? That you'd got that document,
yes.
Which was 2 years before the Santilli film, sort of made all those waves around the world. So, and then Corso's book came out, I think, after yours, didn't it? Okay.
Right around the same period.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit after yours.
I heard from a friend, and there's no way to prove this, but he was saying that some of the autopsy film had leaked, and they couldn't locate who had it, the government, and they contracted people to remake the autopsy film with a few mistakes in it. And that's how either Santilli or the people that made it, the only name that came up was Laughlin. And I don't know if it's Laughlin, Texas, Laughlin, Nevada, Laughlin, California, or a company called Laughlin, or some guy's named Laughlin. That's the only thing he knew for sure, that the name Laughlin was involved in the remake. And he said the Santilli film was definitely sponsored by the government for disinformation in case the real film came out. And after the planned debunking of the Santilli film, if it did ever surface, people would go, oh, there's another fake alien autopsy film, which was a brilliant move.
Yeah.
Because if it did leak out now or after Santilli, people would say that. They'd say, well, that's phony too.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course we had the 2006 movie. We discussed this a little bit a couple of days ago, which I think was made mainly in Britain, actually, because Ray Santilli was a Brit, I think, the guy that broke the story of the film. He was a British guy, and I think he sold his story to turn it into a film script and a screenplay. And one can imagine that Hollywood was briefed on that as a project as well, to help keep that, in the realms of kind of dodginess. And at the end of that film, if people haven't seen it, the 2006 film, there's a brief clip shown, I think it's about a minute or 90 seconds long, of what appears to be an airfield and a lot of soldiers. And the film is very, very badly degraded, but you can actually see the impression of something lying on a gurney or a stretcher, being carried across the airfield, and it is certainly quite an interesting piece of film, isn't it? I don't know whether because I don't know whether you watched that the other day when we spoke of that, and what your thoughts about that were at all.
I don't know. I don't even know if Santilli was hoodwinked, or if Santilli was part of the disinformation process. I don't know. But the follow-on movie you're talking about is almost a spoof to me, kind of making fun of how the whole process happened.
Yeah.
But that's not the truth either, because that's a script, more of a comedy debunking movie about the Santilli film. So I think it's also put out there to discredit any information that may come out, such as the attachment D autopsy, which you're going to put in this, or it's also available other places on the internet.
That's right.
So I think the whole process with this alien autopsy, since the attachment D and the fact that they misplaced or lost or somebody stole some of the original autopsy footage, everything since then has been for disinformation.
I agree. I wanted to just tell you a little bit from my perspective now on what we've just been talking about, because it's triggered off a few things in my own, understanding of things, which I'll try and convey to you, because we talked about how the disinformation with the alien autopsy film has been, manufactured and so on. And there's a chap that we know in the UK who used to work for the UK police, the British Transport Police, and he's called Gary Heseltine. He has started up a magazine that he's called UFO Truth, and he started an online magazine. He started it earlier this year, and he's tried to get together some of the sort of serious research. It's not a debunking magazine, you know. He asked me to write an article for it, which I did. I wrote him a 3,000-word article about Wilbur Smith, the Canadian, which I could talk about to you, but anyway, that's separate. Anyway, so Gary's launched his magazine. He's tried to cover his expenses for doing it. He's not trying to make a lot of money out of it, but he's trying to, make it as a going concern. And then about a month after Gary had asked me to write for this magazine, I got another email from a chap called Philip Mantle. You ever heard of Philip Mantle?
No.
And why I mentioned that is Philip Mantle wrote a book to debunk the alien autopsy film. And I've got an audio of him as well talking about that. But Philip Mantle's also launched this online UFO magazine, which is in direct competition to Gary's magazine. It looks a lot better than Gary's. Gary's is kind of a bit homespun, and Philip Mantle's magazine looks a lot better. You can see where I'm going with that. So what we've discussed there about the film, and particularly what you were saying there about it being a spoof and that. There's a chapter in the book, Ed, called Joe's Search Begin, and as we've already discussed, the character of Joe Green is based on you heavily, and there's a few characters that you describe in the story, and I'd like to ask some questions about some of the characters. And one of the ones we discussed very briefly a few days ago when I spoke to you was Red Redding, and this is the mining prospector who seems to be like poking around Area 51. And he claims to be just an innocent miner, but actually he's trying to find out more about what's going on. So how did this character come about, and who was the person that he was based on, if he was based on a real person? So I just wondered if you could tell us about that.
Well, Red, the prospector, was based on a prospector that used to once in a blue moon come into the Silver Dollar Saloon, an old crusty guy, kind of like out of the old West, and drank straight bourbon. And I always find older people or unique people interesting. And we had a few conversations. He'd say he'd been all over Nevada and California and Arizona prospecting in his lifetime. It was hard to tell his age because he was so weathered. He looked like he almost had like alligator skin or something from being out in the sun for probably 50 years. But I imagine he was in his mid-60s, but he looked like he was like 85. And but he was very articulate, and he basically dropped out of society after the Korean War, and just prospected and found enough gems or crystals or bits of gold or whatever, to get by on. I mean, for all I know, the guy could have been a millionaire and just loved being out in the desert with his Jeep or his donkey or whatever. And so the story was loosely based on a real person.
But that was more.
It was quite a character.
It wasn't that he was like trying to find out secret stuff about Area 51, or was he trying to find out secret stuff about Area 51? Or don't you know?
Well, the only thing he ever mentioned is that he'd been across many classified areas, and that the military wasn't very friendly when he was out there prospecting, and he'd had some run-ins with them, but that's pretty much it.
Right. Yeah.
So I needed a vehicle in the plot, a person that would be out in the desert, and like every human being would have a level of curiosity that maybe he wanted to reveal some of the things that he saw out in the desert that was very classified. Mm. And in order to expose some of that information, Red Redding was the prospector was that vehicle in order to accomplish that.
Okay. That's great. So the next character that comes into that chapter is Carlton Farr, and I heard he describe a little bit about Carlton Farr in another interview that he did, and I think his real name was Carlton Parr.
Well, the funny thing is Farr and Parr, there's like 7 or 8 different spellings in Texas. So I'm not sure if it's German or what the lineage is. I heard a bunch of Farrs and Parrs in San Antonio because they all thought I was talking about them, and
yeah,
got some really saucy emails. But it was literally based on several people. One was an engineer, one was a scientist that worked at Southwest Research, another was a guy that had worked for General Dynamics, and the guy that worked for GD was just very steeped in history and liked to discuss things like evolution and the possibility that our DNA had been messed with purposely at some point, and that we had technologies in the past from different civilizations that he believed in. So a lot of that information about mind control and the history of the aliens and the possibility of genetic manipulation with the DNA of humans and Neanderthals, that came from those 3 people. So that specific instance wasn't one person; it was a composite.
Composite character, yeah.
Right. A lot of people are based on single real people. In other cases, like Owen McKeon was based on 2 different people on the boat dive scene in East China Sea. So, in order to get the technology and the science and even the possible intervention in our civilization, in order to get that information out to the people that don't read nonfiction books, Brad and I subtly wove it into the plot so people could talk about it in the plot.
Right. Okay. And just again, next chapter in the book, Silver Dollar Respite. I was intrigued by this paragraph, which I'm going to read out. I'll just read it out anyway. It says it's discussing the Area 51 security because they're talking about problems with people getting into Area 51 and finding things out. And the character of Joe describes in some detail the characteristics of a particular surveillance satellite. And it says the solar-powered TRW, Stationary High Orbital Reconnaissance Electro-Optical Satellite, SUROS, was a computer-linked telescopic system that utilized solid-state CCD array sensors to scan and to provide real-time infrared and visible wavelength images of objects of less than 2 inches, even through heavy cloud cover and darkness. Real-time data was provided by a burst laser encrypted compressed digital signal transmitter, that's a black DST, and the ground-based computers at Nellis and Groom facilities received surveillance, acquisition, tracking and assessment data that tracked movement by type, speed, direction, size, mass and infrared signature for the western United States. What made the SUROS unique was that the data transmittals could not be intercepted by anyone outside of Area 51 because the laser transmitter and other unique provisions of the system SUROS allowed the operator to differentiate between a rabbit and a coyote, to read tail numbers off aircraft and to identify license plate numbers on ground vehicles. The surveillance system's only weakness lay in areas experiencing severe weather-related electrical disturbance. Even that single flaw was a fluke or FLUC, something of a bad joke inside the NSA Special Operations arena. NSA operatives had switched the Hubble's 94-inch light-gathering mirror at NASA with one that had failed the manufacturer's quality control, along with a space fuzzy logic Unix computer, FLUC. They needed it for the Shoros satellite. The mirror was perfect, but the FLUC was flawed. So I wondered, how much of those details are accurate, and whether there is such a satellite, or whether you were just kind of extrapolating from what you knew, the sorts of things that would.
No, it's funny, but every bit of it's absolutely true and can be verified now. Couldn't back then. But it's based on two things: the keyhole satellites built by the NSA, keyhole 9, 10, 11. 12, they don't call them keyhole anymore. They've changed the name because people became too familiar with them. But the satellite's capabilities back in the mid-90s was that accurate and that up to date. It was just absolutely true. And like I said, over the years, William Banford, who wrote The Puzzle Palace, and other insiders of the NSA have talked about the keyhole satellites. Plus the fact that I had seen the transmitter and computer system on the ground, which we talked about earlier at Groom Air Base. I was up there to work on. It was just a matter of putting together all the different things I knew and a few inputs here and there from my friends that it's very accurate, and you can actually look up keyhole satellites and do some other searches, and you'll find out that in the mid-90s, that's exactly the technology we had.
Wow. And I think one of the things we can say at this point is you've actually produced an updated version, haven't you? And we're going to hopefully make that available soon in some form. I think that's what we're doing.
Yes, what I've done is I've restored the full-length book, which the original publisher had cut 40% out of, and it's been restored. A number of errors have been corrected. And it was Brad Steiger's favorite version of the book, and my wife's and myself, and all of our friends that read the different drafts. So it'll be made available through a ebook.
Great. Okay then, Ed, so there was a chapter called No Man's Land in the book, and within this chapter you're talking to the Red character, or the Red character is telling some of his story, and I'll read out just a short portion. Red had witnessed the most gruesome sight of his life when he was detailed to help search for survivors of a B-29 bomber that had gone down after frantic communications were received that they were being attacked by a large bright light. But the crew, Red, would never forget what had happened to the men in the ill-fated bomber. Although they were still sitting in their safety harnesses, they had all been mutilated. Their anuses had been cored out of their colons, corkscrew patches of skin had been sliced from their necks and jaws. Their eyes and genitalia had been removed by extremely precise surgery, yet no one drop of blood had been spilled anywhere. Sorry, not one drop of blood had been spilled anywhere, nor was any trace of blood left in their bodies. So I just wondered where this story had come from, if anywhere, and what was why was it included at this point?
It was background on Red to get a better understanding of what motivated him. But my co-author Brad Steiger had written and published 140 or more books at the time. I think now he's up to about 170 books. He's a worldwide authority on paranormal and UFOs and abductions, and he basically told me the story about the aircraft and people being mutilated. So we put that in a book. But Brad was had some pretty strong feelings that he believed it was that type of incident had actually happened and had been reported.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've come across in some of the research I've done as well. I've heard there's a story which was originally told by Tony Dodd. It's not that story, but it's another, sort of horrific case of the human mutilation. Okay, so I think, the next chapter introduces the MD Crawford character, which we haven't really talked about so far. And he's this guy who works for the NSA, and he's kind of a paid patriotic assassin. And I just wondered, you know, if this character was based on somebody that was real.
MD Crawford was based on a real character I've known for, well, I first met him over 40 years ago. And he was a sniper in the military. Been to Vietnam numerous times. For some reason, I don't know why, he got out of the military and went to work for the NSA. And basically, he was a hired assassin. I have no reason not to believe his stories because, like I said, I knew his family and I knew him since he was basically 20 years old or whatever. And he tells stories all the time, which we adapted all these stories to the book. And his real name is Mike Crawford. In the book, he's M.D. Crawford. But the guy, if he's alive, still exists. I haven't heard from him several years. But when we were finishing up the book, one day this stranger calls and Rebecca picks up the phone and she says, hello. And this male voice says, who are you? She says, I'm Ed's wife. And he uses an expletive and he says, I didn't know he was married. And she said, can I ask who's calling? And he says, no. So she comes in there with it on the extension saying, you've got a call. And I don't know who it is. And, so I recognized his voice instantly. So I told her to stay on the phone. And after just a couple of minutes, her jaw went from being a little bit ticked off to, you know, just totally blown away, because I'm sure when we were writing this book early on, she thought a lot of it was just pure fiction. But Mike had called and he says, are you going to use my real name in the book? Because he wanted me to. And I said, no, the publisher, the lawyers won't let us do that. And I said, for God's sake, why would you want people to know your real name after some of the stuff you have done? And he says, because I want my daughters to know, because I was a proud patriot. And his attitude always was about, whether it was wet work or assassination or whatever, his attitude was, I'll do whatever the government wants me to do, and they obviously have a reason. If I don't do it, somebody else is. He really considered himself a super patriot, and who am I to question that?
Well, this is how some people operate, isn't it? So, yeah, very interesting.
The problem with super patriots is they can be manipulated or used. I've seen situations where one faction of the government which had one objective, and another faction of the government with the equal power had an opposite objective, and they actually worked against each other. Just like the faction of the government that I know wants to get the truth out there and allows people like me to talk. There's another faction of the government that doesn't want the information about aliens or UFOs out there and would probably like to put me in prison or an insane asylum. And there's tens of thousands of government paid trolls that get on websites and any form of media they can to discredit people that actually have information with credibility.
Yeah, and we'll probably talk about that a bit more later, but that's absolutely true. And I think tens of thousands is probably, well, to me sometimes it seems like an understatement, but tens of thousands is something like that.